Undercover boss notices 3 a.m. customers get a different menu. The truth behind it leaves him speechless. Adrian Virelli had built his restaurant empire one location at a time. 14 years. 31 branches. A chain that served everything from sunrise pancakes to midnight burgers. Because in this business, the clock never stopped. Neither did he. But lately, something was stopping him from sleeping. Not stress. Not deadlines. Numbers. Specifically, one set of numbers that made absolutely no sense. It started 3 weeks ago, on a Tuesday evening, when Adrian sat in his corner office on the 12th floor reviewing the monthly performance reports. His CFO, Donna, had flagged a single-line item in the data, almost apologetically, like she wasn't sure it was worth his time. "This one location," she said, tapping the screen. "Downtown. Corner of Marsh and 5th. Adrian leaned forward. The branch was decent. Not his best performer. Mid-sized dining room, tight neighborhood, reliable but unremarkable. It averaged what every similar location averaged, until the clock hit 3 a.m. Between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m., the revenue at that one branch spiked by nearly 40% above any comparable location. Every single week. Like clockwork. No special promotions. No events listed. No catering orders. No explanation in any report filed by the location manager, a man named Curtis Hale, who had worked for the company for 6 years without incident. Donna had assumed it was a data entry error. Adrian wasn't so sure. He stared at those numbers for 3 days. Then he made a decision that surprised even himself. He wasn't going to send an auditor. He was going to go himself. The disguise wasn't complicated, that was the point. A trimmed beard he'd been growing for 2 weeks. A plain gray hoodie. Scuffed work boots. A fake name on the temp agency paperwork, Danny Reeves, kitchen staff, available nights. No one at that location had ever met him in person. Corporate visits were always announced, always managed. The regional director handled everything on the ground. Adrian existed, to most of his employees, as a name on a paycheck and a photo on the company website, formal suit, confident smile, completely forgettable to someone who'd never been in the same room. He walked into the Marsh and 5th branch at 10 p.m. on a Wednesday for his first graveyard shift. The manager on duty, Curtis Hale, gave him a 30-second orientation, handed him a prep list, and pointed toward the kitchen without making eye contact. He was distracted. His phone buzzed constantly. He kept stepping into the hallway to take calls, lowering his voice each time. Adrian kept his head down and worked. He learned fast. He sliced, restocked, washed, smiled when smiled at. The overnight crew was small, 6 people, including himself. A cook named Benny who hadn't stopped humming since the shift started. A pair of waitresses who looked exhausted by midnight. A dishwasher barely out of his teens named Marco who moved through his work like a ghost. It felt ordinary. Until 3:07 a.m. Adrian heard the side entrance first. Not the front door, the side one, the entrance marked staff only near the end of the narrow hallway. It opened with a quiet click, not a bang, like someone who knew exactly how to open it without drawing attention. He angled himself near the prep window, pretending to check inventory. 3 men walked in. They were not there for the 3 a.m. special. These weren't night shift workers stopping for coffee and a burger before heading home. These men wore dress shirts with the top buttons open, good watches, shoes that didn't belong on a restaurant floor. They carried nothing except their phones and a calm, practiced ease, the kind of ease that comes from knowing exactly where you're going and exactly who will be waiting. Curtis appeared from nowhere. Adrian had last seen him in the back office. But here he was, at the entrance of the side hallway, unhurried, like he'd been expecting them to walk through that door at exactly that minute. He didn't greet them loudly. He didn't hand them menus. He simply nodded, turned, and led them down the hallway toward the far end, past the restrooms, past the storage shelves, all the way to a door Adrian hadn't paid attention to before. A door with a combination lock. Labeled, in small black letters, VIP. Curtis punched in the code with his body blocking the keypad, and the three men filed inside without a word. The door clicked shut behind them. Adrian stood very still. His mind was already moving faster than his hands, which had stopped mid-task without him noticing. He set down the clipboard slowly. Watched the hallway. Waited. 12 minutes passed. Then a waitress, not one of the two from earlier, but a third woman he hadn't been introduced to, who seemed to materialize only after 3 a.m., walked past him carrying something tucked under her arm. A menu. Black cover. Thicker than the standard one. No logo on the front. She disappeared through the same door. Adrian turned back to his prep station and stared at the wall. 40% revenue spike. Off-book customers. A locked VIP room with no listing in any corporate document he'd ever signed. A black menu that had never once appeared in any brand guidelines, marketing meeting, or supply order. He replayed the last 3 minutes in his mind like a film reel. The side entrance. The combination lock. The men who looked like they owned the room before they even walked into it. His restaurant. His restaurant. Adrian Verelli gripped the edge of the prep counter and made himself breathe. Because one thing was suddenly, completely, terrifyingly clear. Whatever was happening behind that door had absolutely nothing to do with food. Adrian didn't sleep when he got home that morning. He sat at his kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee and his laptop, pulling up every report, every inventory log, every staff schedule filed by the Marsh and Fifth location over the last 4 months. He wasn't looking for something obvious. Obvious things don't survive 6 years under the same manager. He was looking for the seams, the tiny places where a careful lie starts to come apart. He found the first one inside an hour. Food waste. Every restaurant in his chain filed a daily waste report: spoiled produce, overcooked portions, prep errors. It was standard. It was expected. No one at corporate looked twice at it because waste was just a cost of doing business. But at Marsh and Fifth, the waste numbers had a strange consistency. Not too high. Not too low. Almost perfectly calibrated, the kind of calibration that doesn't happen naturally. It happens deliberately. Specific high-cost items, Wagyu beef, black truffle sides, aged cuts, were logged as wasted almost every week. Quietly. Routinely. As if someone had learned exactly how much they could write off before the number triggered a flag. Except those items were still being served to someone. They just weren't appearing in any sales record. Adrian closed the laptop. He needed to go back. The second night, he watched differently. He wasn't just working anymore. He was cataloging. Every movement. Every habit. Every small routine the staff followed without thinking, because routine is where the truth lives. The customers began arriving at 2:52 a.m. Not together. Never together. That was the first thing he noticed. They came in intervals of 4 to 7 minutes apart, always through the side entrance, always alone or in pairs. Different faces than the night before, but the same energy, controlled, unhurried, purposeful. These weren't people stumbling into a late-night diner on a whim. They had somewhere specific to be. Curtis was ready for each one. He didn't check his phone before they arrived. He didn't need to. He simply reappeared in the hallway at 2:50 a.m. like a switch had been flipped, and from that point on he was a different man, focused, attentive, almost gracious, in a way Adrian had never seen him manage with actual paying customers during a normal shift. Each person was escorted. Each one went through the same door. Orders were written by hand on a small notepad Curtis kept in his breast pocket. Adrian caught a glimpse of it once when Curtis leaned past him to grab something from the shelf. Small, spiral-bound, the kind you'd find in a dollar store. Nothing digital. Nothing that touched a screen or a system. Payments came in envelopes. Adrian saw the first one exchange near the end of the hallway, passed from a man in a navy jacket to Curtis with the practiced casualness of a handshake. Barely a second, barely a glance. But the envelope was thick. Not letter thick. The kind of thick that means the person handing it over isn't worried about the amount inside. Curtis slid it into his jacket, and walked away like nothing happened. An hour before the shift ended, Adrian volunteered to run inventory checks in the back. No one questioned it. New guy being eager was never suspicious. He moved quickly through the stockroom, cross-referencing what was physically on the shelves against what the system said should be there. The wagyu. The truffle items. The premium cuts. All present in smaller quantities than logged. The system said they'd been wasted. The shelves said they'd been used. Someone was cooking for the VIP room. Real food, real cost, and then burying it inside the waste reports so it never showed up as a sale. It was clever. It was meticulous. And it had clearly been working for long enough that whoever designed it felt completely comfortable. This wasn't a disorganized side hustle. This was a system. Built piece by piece. Tested. Refined. Running smoothly inside his own restaurant like a second business wearing his company's face. Adrian stacked the inventory sheets back in order, careful not to leave anything disturbed. He walked back to his station, picked up where he'd left off, and spent the rest of the shift saying nothing. But his mind was already somewhere else entirely. Because a disorganized thief panics and makes mistakes. Whoever built this didn't panic. Whoever built this had done it before, and they'd done it well. Which meant they weren't planning to stop. The third night started like the others. Adrian arrived at 10 p.m., changed into his apron, and slotted himself back into the rhythm of the overnight crew without friction. He'd become part of the furniture now, reliable, quiet, easy to overlook. That was exactly where he needed to be. But tonight was different. Tonight, he wasn't just watching. He had spent the previous afternoon studying the restaurant's floor plan, the original architectural layout filed during the branch's opening permit, pulled quietly through a contact at corporate real estate. He knew now that the VIP room was originally designed as an overflow storage space, roughly 400 square feet, with a ventilation shaft that connected to the main kitchen wall. More importantly, he knew there was a service corridor running alongside it. If he could get close enough during the 3 a.m. window, even just close enough to hear, it might tell him something concrete, something beyond inventory discrepancies and handwritten notepads. Something he could actually use. He waited until 2:40 a.m., when Curtis drifted toward the front to prepare for arrivals, and the rest of the crew was locked in their routines. Then Adrian slipped into the hallway, moving casually, carrying an empty supply crate as cover. He made it halfway to the service corridor. "Hey!" The voice came from behind him, calm, flat, carrying just enough authority to stop his feet without being loud enough to alert anyone else. It was Marcus, the assistant manager. Early 30s, broad-shouldered, with the particular stillness of someone who spent a lot of time watching other people move. Adrian had clocked him on the first night, and filed him away as quiet, efficient, loyal to Curtis in the way that middle management often is, not out of affection, but out of self-interest. "Curtis needs extra prep done in the walk-in." Marcus said it the way you say something that isn't actually a request. "Benny's tied up on the line." "You're up." Adrian looked at the crate in his hands. Then at Marcus. "Sure," he said. "No problem." The walk-in freezer was at the opposite end of the kitchen, cold, loud with the hum of the compressor, and completely isolated from the hallway he'd been heading toward. Whether or not there was any actual prep work that needed doing, it didn't matter. The message was clear. Turn around. Go somewhere else. He'd been redirected. Which meant someone had noticed him heading in the wrong direction. Adrian pulled on the insulated gloves hanging by the freezer door and stepped inside. He didn't hurry. Didn't react. He found a crate of vegetables that genuinely needed sorting and started working through it, letting the cold settle around him, while his mind stayed warm and sharp. He heard the door open again about 4 minutes later. Small footsteps. Hesitant. He turned. It was the girl, the third waitress, the one who appeared only after 3 a.m., who he'd been trying to get a closer look at since the first night. She was younger than he'd initially thought. Maybe 23, 24. Dark hair pulled back tight, a small scar near her left eyebrow, eyes that moved quickly and settled slowly, the eyes of someone who had learned to read rooms before walking into them. She reached past him, grabbed a bag of something from the lower shelf, and didn't leave. Instead, she lowered her voice to just above the compressor hum. "Don't go near that hallway again." Adrian kept his hands moving on the vegetables. "I was just restocking." "No," she cut him off without raising her voice. "You weren't." He looked at her. She wasn't looking at him. Her eyes were on the freezer door, making sure it stayed shut. "A dishwasher asked about that room 2 months ago," she said. "Just asked? Didn't go near it, didn't touch anything. Just asked one of the waitresses what it was used for." She paused. "Curtis had him let go the next morning. No warning. No reason given. Just gone." Adrian said nothing. "There are people who come here that you don't want to be curious around," she continued quietly. "Curtis has partners. Outside people. The room is theirs 1 night a week, sometimes 2. We don't ask what happens inside. We don't talk about it outside. That's the deal." "What's your name?" Adrian asked. She finally looked at him directly. "It doesn't matter," she said. Then she picked up the bag, pushed open the freezer door, and walked out without another word. Adrian stood alone in the cold. His employees weren't running this. They weren't partners in it. They were trapped inside it, kept in line by the one thing more reliable than greed: fear. And whoever was behind that locked door knew exactly how to use it. Adrian took a personal day. That wasn't unusual for a CEO, no one questioned it. He told his assistant he needed time to review some regional data privately, which was close enough to the truth that it didn't feel like a lie. He drove to headquarters at 7 a.m., took the elevator to his floor before anyone else arrived, and locked his office door behind him. Then he started pulling everything. He began with the security footage. Every branch in the chain fed into a centralized cloud server, a system his IT team had installed 18 months ago as part of a company-wide security upgrade. The footage was stored in rolling 30-day backups, accessible remotely by a small number of senior staff. Adrian pulled up Marsh and Fifth. He went straight to the 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. window. Monday through Sunday, going back 12 weeks. The footage was there for most of the week. Clear, time-stamped, exactly as it should be. But between 2:50 a.m. and 4:10 a.m., specifically, only on the nights when the revenue spike appeared in the data, the footage didn't freeze or glitch. It simply wasn't there. Not corrupted. Not damaged. Deliberately overwritten. Someone with system access was wiping a clean 90-minute window from the cloud backup every single time the VIP room opened for business. They weren't panicking about cameras. They were managing them. Routinely. Efficiently. Adrian sat back in his chair and stared at the ceiling for a moment. This wasn't a restaurant manager running a side hustle out of greed. This was an operation that had thought through every layer of exposure, the inventory, the POS system, the cameras, and quietly neutralized each one. Someone with knowledge, access, and patience had designed this. Curtis Hale was organized and careful, but this level of construction required something more than one man with a notepad and a combination lock. There were other people involved. People who understood systems. And at least one of them had access to his company's internal network. By 9 a.m., Adrian had made 2 calls he told no one about. The first was to a forensic accountant named Gerald Spence, semi-retired, discreet, recommended years ago by a lawyer friend for exactly the kind of situation where you needed answers before you needed attention. Adrian gave him 4 months of Marsh and Fifth's financial records and asked him to find anything that didn't belong. The second call was to a cybersecurity consultant named Priya Okafor, who had done contract work for the company the year before and knew the architecture of their server system better than most of Adrian's own IT staff. He asked her one specific question: was there any data on the cloud server that wasn't connected to restaurant operations? He told both of them the same thing. Fast. Quiet. No paper trail beyond what I've already handed you. Priya called back that same afternoon. She'd found something buried in the backup partition of the cloud server, a secondary encrypted log, running parallel to the restaurant's operating system but completely disconnected from it. It had its own access credentials, its own timestamps. It had been active for at least 7 months. She couldn't crack the encryption without more time, but the structure of the log told her enough. The transaction volume didn't match food sales. The data packets were too large, too frequent, and too irregular to be anything generated by a restaurant POS system. Whatever was being recorded in that log had nothing to do with burgers or coffee. This wasn't set up by an amateur, Priya said carefully, as if she was still deciding how worried to be. Whoever built this knew exactly what they were doing with your infrastructure. Adrian thanked her and hung up. Gerald Spence sent his preliminary findings 2 hours later, a single-page summary with 3 items circled in red. Premium inventory costs didn't match waste reports. Weekly cash deposits made at a branch-level account were slightly too round, too consistent, a classic indicator of structured deposits designed to stay under reporting thresholds. And a vendor account, listed under a catering supplier Adrian didn't recognize, had been receiving small, regular payments for 11 months. The vendor didn't exist. Adrian looked at that last line for a long time. A ghost vendor. A parallel encrypted log. Overwritten camera footage on a precise schedule. Taken separately, each one was a problem. Taken together, they weren't a coincidence or a scheme. They were infrastructure. Someone hadn't just corrupted one branch of his company. They had moved in. Adrian didn't go to the restaurant on the 4th night. He went to the parking lot across the street instead. He'd rented a different car, nothing from his usual service, nothing connected to his name. A plain dark sedan, paid in cash through a contact he trusted. He parked at the far end of the lot at 9:30 p.m. with a direct sideline to the restaurant's staff exit and settled in to wait. Curtis Hale finished his shift at 11 p.m. Curtis didn't go home. Adrian followed him at a careful distance through the downtown grid, then onto the expressway heading north, then off into a cluster of quiet suburban streets that felt deliberately chosen for their emptiness. No pedestrians. No open businesses. The kind of neighborhood where a car sitting still for 20 minutes would be noticed by morning but not at midnight. Curtis pulled into a parking garage on the corner of Delmore and 9th, 3 levels, mostly empty, the kind of structure attached to an office building that locked its upper floors after hours. He went to the 2nd level. Adrian parked on the street, killed his lights, and watched the entrance. 8 minutes later, a black SUV rolled in from the opposite side. 2 men climbed out. Suits. Not the casual dress shirt variety Adrian had seen entering the restaurant. These were proper suits, dark, fitted, the kind worn by people who needed to look legitimate in places where legitimacy was being quietly negotiated. One was heavy-set with close-cropped gray hair. The other was younger, leaner, with the focused expression of someone whose job was to stand slightly behind the first man and say very little. Curtis met them in the middle of the level. There was no greeting Adrian could see from his angle. No handshakes. Just the immediate, efficient body language of people who had met in this exact configuration before and didn't need warmth to move through the transaction. The heavy-set man opened the back of the SUV. 2 briefcases. Curtis examined the first one, not nervously, not quickly. Calmly. The way a professional checks something they've checked many times before. He nodded once. The younger man loaded both cases into Curtis's trunk with the mechanical ease of a man completing a task, not witnessing one. It was over in under 4 minutes. Adrian photographed all of it from the street, the SUV's plates, the faces when the garage lighting caught them right, the cases, the exchange. His hands were steady. His breathing was not. He was back behind the prep counter at Marsh and 5th by 2 a.m. the following night. He needed to hear it now, not just see it. He needed the inside language, the details that photographs couldn't capture. He worked quietly and listened to everything. At 2:55 a.m., Curtis appeared in the kitchen doorway, not to manage anything, just passing through, phone pressed to his ear, murmuring in a tone too low to decipher. Then, at 3:17 a.m., Adrian heard it. 2 men at the side entrance, Curtis greeting them in the hallway just within earshot of where Adrian stood at the prep window. Their voices were low but not inaudible, carried by the quiet of the dead hour and the narrow corridor's acoustics. 2 black truffle specials tonight, the first man said. Curtis nodded without writing anything down. And to drink? Add a bottle of reserve. That was it. 30 seconds. Then the door to the VIP room clicked shut, and the hallway was empty again. Adrian stared at the prep counter. 2 black truffle specials. A bottle of reserve. He'd seen those items on the standard menu. Real dishes, real prices, unremarkable. But no food came out of that kitchen for the VIP room that night. He'd watched the line closely enough to be certain. Nothing was plated. Nothing was carried down the hallway. They weren't ordering food. They were communicating numbers. He thought about the briefcases in the parking garage. The cash envelopes. The encrypted transaction logs Priya had found running silently inside his server. The ghost vendor receiving steady payments. And suddenly the shape of it assembled itself completely in his mind, clean and devastating, the way terrible things become clear all at once. The food was never the product. The restaurant was the location. The menu was the language. The VIP room was the counting room. What was being run behind that combination lock wasn't a dining experience. It was a gambling operation. And the cash moving through those briefcases wasn't profit. It was being cleaned. Right inside his restaurant. His name above the door. Night 5 started with a feeling Adrian couldn't name. Not fear exactly. Something quieter and more persistent. The specific discomfort of a man who knows he is standing on the edge of something much larger than he originally measured. He'd spent 14 years making calculated risks. Signing leases on locations everyone else passed on. Expanding during downturns. Betting on people when the numbers said otherwise. But those risks had consequences measured in money. This one felt different. He arrived at 10 p.m. as usual, tied his apron, and took his position. The shift ran normally through midnight, through 1 a.m., through the slow drag of 2 a.m. when the diner thinned to almost nothing and the overnight crew moved through their routines on autopilot. Adrian stayed alert beneath the surface of it all. At 2:48 a.m., the side entrance opened. 3 men tonight. 2 he hadn't seen before. The third was one of the suited regulars, the younger, leaner one from the parking garage, the one whose job seemed to be watching without appearing to watch. Adrian recognized him immediately. He made sure not to show it. He kept his eyes on the prep counter and his peripheral vision on the hallway, tracking the movement without turning his head. It was a skill he hadn't known he possessed until this week, the ability to observe without looking, to pay attention without appearing to. But at 3:22 a.m., he made a mistake. It was small. Almost nothing. The kind of mistake that wouldn't matter in any other situation. He looked up at the wrong moment. The lean man from the garage was passing the prep window on his way back from the restroom. Their eyes met for exactly 2 seconds, not long enough to mean anything definitive, but long enough for a man trained in suspicion to register it and file it away. Adrian looked back down immediately. But the damage was already a seed, planted and growing. At 3:50 a.m., Curtis sent him outside for trash duty. It wasn't unusual. Trash duty rotated through the crew, and Adrian had done it twice before without incident. He wheeled the first bin through the back exit into the alley, the cold air hitting him hard after hours in the warm kitchen. He lifted the dumpster lid when he heard footsteps behind him. Curtis. Hands in his pockets. Posture relaxed. But his eyes were doing the opposite of relaxing. They were working, measuring, running a calculation Adrian could almost hear. "You settling in all right, Danny?" Curtis asked. The name landed with a particular weight. Not warm. Not casual. Pointed, in the way that only sounds pointed once you're already paying attention. "Yeah," Adrian said easily, lowering the bag in. "Shift's flying." "Good," Curtis nodded slowly, looking down the alley toward the street. "Temp guys usually take a few weeks to find their rhythm. You're picking things up fast. Just trying to stay useful." A pause. longer than conversation required. "You ask a lot of questions for a temp hire," Curtis said. He said it quietly, without aggression, which somehow made it worse. Aggression had edges you could work around. This was flat and deliberate, a door being held open just long enough for Adrian to decide what to do next. Adrian almost laughed. Let it die before it reached his face. "I like knowing how things work," he said with a small shrug. "Habit." Curtis looked at him for one more second. Then nodded once, and walked back inside without another word. Adrian stood alone in the alley. His pulse was doing something unpleasant. He breathed through it, counted backward from 10, and made a decision in the cold silence that had been building for 5 nights. He couldn't wait any longer. At 4:30 a.m., in the staff bathroom with the tap running, Adrian typed a message on a phone registered to an address that didn't connect to him. He sent it to a contact he'd found through his lawyer, a federal agent in the Financial Crimes Division with a documented history of organized crime cases. He attached the photographs from the parking garage. A compressed file of Priya's findings. Gerald's circled line items. His own written account of 5 nights, timestamps, names, observed transactions, coded phrases. He pressed send. The reply came 11 minutes later. "We know about this operation. We've been watching it in 3 other cities. Your location is a node. Do not engage further. Do not alter your behavior. We'll be in contact." Adrian stared at the screen. 3 other cities. His restaurant wasn't the problem. It was just the one he'd accidentally walked into. The federal agent's name was Carla Reyes. She called Adrian on the same untraceable phone at 6 a.m., 2 days after he sent the files. Her voice was measured and unhurried, the voice of someone who had been building toward this moment long before Adrian Varelli walked into a graveyard shift with a fake name and scuffed boots. She told him 3 things. The operation had been running across 7 locations in 4 cities for nearly 2 years. The men using his restaurant's VIP room were mid-level figures in an organized gambling network that moved significant cash weekly. The network needed legitimate businesses as laundry points. Restaurants were ideal because cash flow was naturally irregular, and inventory losses were easy to disguise. Then she told him what she needed from him. "Keep showing up," she said. "Same schedule. Same behavior. If you disappear or the location goes quiet, they'll know something shifted and we lose the window." Adrian agreed without hesitating. He went back for nights 6 and 7. They were the longest nights of his life. Not because anything dramatic happened, because nothing did. The operation ran exactly as it always had. Curtis at the side entrance. The envelopes. The coded menu phrases. The black door closing on whatever business conducted itself beyond it. Adrian prepped and stocked and cleaned and said nothing. But the knowledge of what was coming sat inside his chest like a stone with a specific weight, and carrying it through 2 ordinary shifts without letting it show on his face required a kind of discipline he hadn't known he was capable of. On the second of those nights, he passed Marco, the young dishwasher, near the end of the shift. Marco was drying a stack of plates with the quiet efficiency he brought to everything, earbuds in, face neutral. Adrian thought about what the waitress had told him in the freezer. A dishwasher asked about that room. He was fired the next morning. He looked at Marco and felt something tighten in his chest that had nothing to do with federal investigations or encrypted transaction logs. These were just people doing a job. Showing up in the middle of the night because the bills didn't care what hours you kept. He owed them more than an apology. He kept moving. On the 3rd day after Reyes's call, at 2:55 a.m., Adrian was restocking the prep shelf when the back door opened. Not the side entrance. The back door, both of them, simultaneously, with the controlled efficiency of people who had rehearsed this exact movement until hesitation was no longer possible. Federal agents in tactical gear moved through the kitchen with quiet, devastating speed, and for a single suspended moment the overnight crew froze completely. Benny at the line, Marco at the sink, the waitresses near the pass, all of them locked in the particular stillness of people whose world has just changed shape without warning. Adrian pressed himself against the prep counter and stayed exactly where he was. Reyes came in through the back entrance behind the tactical team, plain clothes, badge visible. She found his eyes across the kitchen and gave him a single nod. He nodded back. The combination lock on the VIP door lasted approximately 4 seconds. Then it was open. Later, Adrian would try to find the right word for what he saw when the door swung wide and the lights went up inside that room. He never quite found it. 4 poker tables, proper ones, felt-topped, professional grade, arranged in a space that had been completely transformed from the storage room on the original building plans. A small bar along the far wall. A locked cabinet that agents moved immediately toward. A folding table near the back covered in ledgers, notebooks, 2 laptops, and banded cash in quantities that made the room feel temporarily unreal. Curtis was at the far table. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He stood up slowly with the stunned expression of a man who had genuinely believed he'd built something airtight, and was now watching it come apart at every seam simultaneously. The 2 suited men beside him were less composed. It didn't help them. 3 arrests. Handcuffs. Names read aloud. The specific bureaucratic calm of law enforcement doing something they've prepared for carefully. Adrian watched it all from the kitchen doorway. Then Reyes was beside him, and she said quietly, "We need you to identify yourself to the arresting officers." Formally. For the record. Adrian pulled off his apron. Straightened up. "My name is Adrian Varelli," he said, for the first time in 8 days. "I own this restaurant." The room went very still. Marco dropped a plate. The agents worked through the rest of the night. Statements were taken. Evidence was bagged and labeled. The VIP room was photographed from every angle, its contents catalogued with the quiet thoroughness of people who understood that what happened in the next courtroom depended entirely on what was documented in the next hour. The staff were separated, questioned gently, and cleared one by one. Adrian sat in a booth in the empty dining room and waited. By 5 a.m., the tactical team was gone. Reyes and 2 other agents remained, finishing paperwork near the front. The kitchen had gone completely silent for the first time since Adrian had started working here. No hum of equipment, no shuffle of footsteps, no low murmur of a crew moving through its routine. Just the particular quiet of a place that has been hollowed out, and hasn't yet figured out what it is now. The staff drifted back into the dining room slowly, the way people do after something shocking, not all at once, but in ones and twos, drawn together by the simple human need to be near other people when the ground has shifted. Benny sat heavily in a corner booth, still in his apron. The 2 waitresses stayed close together near the window, arms crossed, not speaking. Marco stood near the counter, a little apart from everyone else, staring at the floor with the expression of someone replaying the last 8 days and finding things that now looked entirely different in hindsight. Adrian looked at each of them. Then he stood up and walked to the center of the room. "I need to tell you something," he said. They looked at him. Most of them still didn't know who he was. The agents had been careful, keeping his identity contained to formal channels. To the crew, he was still Danny Reeves, the quiet temp hire who apparently knew federal agents. He told them plainly. His name. His title. Why he was here. All of it, from the revenue spike in the report to Donna's flagged line item to the decision to come himself rather than send someone else. He didn't dress it up or make it sound strategic. He said it the way it actually happened, a man who found a number that didn't make sense and couldn't let it go. The silence that followed was a specific kind. Not angry. Not betrayed. Just the heavy, recalibrating silence of people absorbing something that recontextualizes the last week of their lives in real time. Benny let out a long breath and stared at the table. One of the waitresses laughed, a short, involuntary sound that was more relief than humor. Marco looked up from the floor and said nothing, but something shifted in his expression. The wariness dissolved slightly, replaced by something Adrian could only describe as exhausted recognition. Like a weight he'd been carrying without naming it had finally been acknowledged by someone with the authority to do something about it. Adrian told them 4 things. None of them were being held responsible. The investigation had made clear that the staff were managed through intimidation, not recruited as participants. Their employment records would reflect nothing beyond their actual work. Anyone who wanted a transfer to a different location would have one arranged immediately, with no questions and no delay. Anyone who needed time off while things settled would have it paid. Corporate oversight at this location, and every overnight location in the chain, was being redesigned from the ground up. New camera infrastructure. Independent auditing. A direct reporting line to his office for any staff member, anonymously, without going through local management. And finally, the thing he hadn't planned to say but said anyway, because the room required honesty and he was too tired for anything else. I should have known sooner. Not the scheme. I don't know how I would have found that from a boardroom. But the pressure you were all under. The silence you were forced into. That's something a better system should have caught, and it didn't. That's on me. Nobody responded immediately. That was fine. He didn't say it to receive something back. At 5:47 a.m., Adrian stepped outside through the front door. The street was doing what streets do in the hour before a city fully wakes, quiet, gray, full of the specific stillness that belongs only to that precise window between night and morning. He stood on the sidewalk and looked up at the sign above the door. His name wasn't on it. Just the brand. Just the logo he'd chosen 14 years ago in a rented office with bad lighting and an idea he wasn't entirely sure would survive the first year. He thought about the 3 a.m. revenue spike. How it had looked in the data, promising, even exciting, the kind of number you circle and bring to a meeting as evidence that something is working. It had almost destroyed everything. Not through failure. Through a version of success that was never his to begin with. Adrian stood there until the first real light of morning touched the top of the building opposite, and somewhere behind him the city began, slowly, to wake. He didn't feel like a man who had won something. He felt like a man who had been reminded, in the most expensive way possible, that the thing most capable of hiding corruption isn't darkness. It's a number that looks exactly like progress.